Okay, so let's plant a little trough garden, a little miniature landscape. We're going to start with one of the little miniature Chamaecyparis. This one is called Chamaecyparis Little Jamie. It's one that's going to stay quite small and appropriately scaled to this little miniature landscape. These are all items that can go into part shade, including one of this is Lakeside Babyface Hosta, which is also a miniature hosta. Flowers will come up about maybe 6 inches high, but never gets any taller than this as far as foliage. This is a miniature daylily, Humercalis Pennyworth, which will flower with little yellow flowers in the middle of the summer. Very similar in color to Stella d'Oro, but smaller scale. This is a hosta feather boa. That golden color really shines when you put it next to the dark green of the other foliages. You notice the media that we're growing it in is an alpine soil. It's very, very gritty, fine textured, more suited to alpine varieties. It drains well, and so you're not going to get it, won't get too wet during the summer months. We're also going to include a little viola. This particular one is called Columbine. I like this one because it has these little streaks in the flowers. And you notice that we're creating this little landscape without not much work. So we have a lot of our older customers who have very small patio garden areas, but they can create a series of landscape vignettes by planting several of these alpine gardens. In fact, we have one customer who has us redo her 8 little miniature landscapes every spring. She brings them in, we weed them, we replant them with a few new things, maybe take out some of the larger. She's been doing this for about 10 years, and some of the plants are getting a little bit larger. We divide them, but how much quicker could you make a little landscape than that? And we've got all of these great little accoutrements. Here's a little bridge, or here's a little Japanese pagoda. Or if you are of that persuasion, you could do something like a little fairy in the middle of the garden, and that's great to include the grandkids and the younger members of the family because they love those little miniature items. And it creates a whole little world. So you've got here a little landscape that is going to give you interest and color right all the way, even through the winter, because you've got some of these evergreen things. The hostas are going to be there through all summer long, as well as the violas and this pretty little miniature daylily. If we look over here, you can slide over and see some of the other alpine varieties. This one's a sun garden. So this has a little miniature Gypsophila, which is a baby's breath relative. This is a little Armeria, and this is a little Silene. And you can see, again, we usually set in little rocks. We use some of that alpine soil, but you can put in all kinds of little interesting fairy garden items that will give it sort of an interesting texture. I also love to just collect rocks or put in moss to give it a little bit of an accent. Oh, now look at Sesame. Oh, even the cats like these gardens. So here is a succulent garden. So for somebody that really can't spend a lot of time watering their garden, this one is great because you can water just a couple times a month and still have them survive and perform well. So there's several varieties of sedum and sempervivum, also known as hens and chicks. Can take the sun and hot, dry conditions. And again, you could include any one of these other little alpine fairy garden ornaments. I love these little items. Here's a little bridge that you could somehow include in that space. If we go over here, we've got some other little alpine varieties. This is a saxifrage. This is a Delosperma. This is an Australian native called Raulia australis. Almost feels like it's made of rubber, actually. The texture is interesting. This is a little Sagina, also known as Irish moss. This is a little miniature hardy geranium. So you can see the variety of alpine varieties that have small leaves, small textures, interesting flowers. If we look over here, We have, again, that pretty little variegated saxifrage, which will flower with little white flowers. This is a little sisyrinchium, also known as blue-eyed grass. Almost looks like a little miniature iris. That one continues to bloom all summer long. And here is a Louisia, a succulent variety that blooms also most of the summer, and then some of the other little mosses. If we go over to here, we have a Laurentia, also known as little blue star creeper. A lot of the things that are known as steppables, plants that can be put in between pathways, are also appropriate for little alpine gardens because their foliage texture and their leaf size is very small. Here is a golden leaf. You can tell I like golden foliage. Golden leaf sedum really brightens that whole, and it contrasts nicely to this purple leaf sisyrinchium and this little alpine moss. And again, little pots, little rocks. You can move rocks around. It's much easier to move these than it is boulders out in the garden. Here is a little dark leaf Viola labradorica. Can you see that with that one flowers a good portion of the summer, but look at that black foliage color against these really interesting little alpine containers. Here is a white saxifraga. This one flowers a good portion of the early spring, but again has that very, very fine textured foliage, and these containers really give you an interesting accent as well. If we move down to the very, very bottom row, here we can see a vibrant black-eyed geranium, perennial geranium, tiny, tiny leaves. Here is a little white armeria called cottontail. That little white will flower a good portion of the summer months. Here we have, again, a mixture of some sedums, and there's that sisyrinchium and the raulia. So you can see that combinations are almost endless. There is a little miniature ajuga over here, which will flower with bright blue flowers later in the season. Again, that sisyrinchium, and here's a golden sagina, also known as Irish moss. So you can see between all of the succulent varieties and the alpine varieties and the evergreens that can be set in, you can do a whole creation of a huge variety of landscapes, including everything from A to Z. We have a little over 350 varieties that we use in our alpine containers. Done. Done, done, done. Whew.